Okay, so last week I gave you guys 4 signs Mark Carney could be disastrous for Canada already. Now, as you know, this is a centrist channel and we try to balance things out when we can. Here are 5 signs that Mark Carney may not be a complete disaster as Canada's Prime Minister. Here's number 1. At number 1, it's simple. One Canadian economy. Look, people sometimes look at this idea of one Canadian economy like, duh, it was obvious all along, right? I mean, what is so fancy about one Canadian economy, right? It's not like Mark Carney came up with this idea all on his own. Poliev actually made a whole production of this on his YouTube channel, talking about how it is easier to sell products to the US than it is to sell to ourselves. So it is that obvious. It was obvious when Trudeau was in government and Mark Carney was his advisor. It was obvious when Harper was in government and Poliev was a cabinet minister. It has been obvious since fucking Confederation that we needed one Canadian economy. But it looks like it will be Donald Trump who delivers that one Canadian economy. I'm kidding, okay? Mark Carney has used the Trump threat effectively here. Like, he used it to win an election. He is now using it to scare the provinces and, by extension, the Canadian people into submission. And I don't think that is a bad thing in this particular context, right? Breaking down interprovincial trade barriers will increase our GDP per capita by as much as 4%. It could add up to $200 billion per year to Canada's economy. Look, forget all that. That's all up there in the stratosphere. What does it do for us regular folk? Higher GDP would mean higher salaries, more job opportunities, lower prices, and for more than a century, this country decided to leave that money on the table. We convinced ourselves that we were doing this to protect local industries within each separate provinces and protect the jobs that come with those industries. Also, because provinces have different perspectives on regulation as well, so it was just expedient to have 13 small economies. Look, I do not know what the one Canadian economy that Mark Carney will deliver on Canada Day will look like, but if we can actually do this, wow, I think it will be huge, Like, they've now introduced the One Canadian Economy Act in Parliament. I guess we'll have to see if the Conservatives oppose it. But here's number 2. At number 2, GDP is still up despite the trade war. Now, people were predicting a meltdown. Literally the worst annual growth in Canada's GDP since 2016. That's what we were predicting, right? Instead, Canada's GDP actually beat expectations in the first quarter of 2025. In real GDP terms, we kept the same pace as the fourth quarter of last year at 0.5%. Now, on an annualized basis, at 2.2%, we are outpacing the estimates by quite a bit, right? Now, to contrast, the US economy actually shrank by 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025. Now, put that in your pipe and smoke it, right? It's wild. I couldn't believe it when I saw this. Now, look, a lot of this growth in Canada was because businesses were rushing to stockpile inventory. Wages also grew in certain sectors, especially in Western Canada. All of these things could all be better, but those are good signs, considering the climate that we're in. You'll take what you can get because there is a storm coming, but we're hanging in there. That's good to see. The only blip to point out is that grocery prices are up year to date. Obviously, this represents an increase in cost of living at a time where Canadians are struggling. Look at this right here. Poliev posted this graphic a few days ago. But the graphic says beef strip loin is up 34.2% since the start of 2025. Eggs are up 3.6%, it looks like. It's weird, right? Inflation is down. Energy prices are down as well since Mark Carney canceled the consumer carbon tax. So why are prices of groceries up, right? The reason for the price increase is really twofold. One, there is uncertainty in the markets, so that causes prices to go up automatically. Number 2, the grocery corporations are greedy fucks who continue to find ways to screw regular people. Now, of course, the middle class tax cut that Mark Carney is proposing will help a little bit with this unaffordability issue. At the very least, it will neutralize the grocery price increase and you'll be back where you started, basically. So it's not really going to do too much. So let's move on to number 3. This one's about Pierre Poilievre. You're probably wondering how Poilievre's recent behavior will be a good thing for Mark Carney. At number 3, Poilievre is panicking. And I think that's a good sign that Mark Carney may not be the disaster that maybe my conservative friends might expect. There was a period there right after the election where it was very peaceful. Pierre Poilievre was peak humble in those days after the election. Even in the lead up to the election, he wasn't even slinging mud like that because I guess maybe his team told him to kind of change tact a little bit. And after the election, he spoke about working with the government. And I was like, wow, this could actually be good for this country because he had some good ideas. Like, love him or hate him, Pierre Poilievre had some good ideas. So I was thinking, all the parties working together to deliver for us? Yeah, I'll have that. Give me some of that. Now, barely 2 months after, I think we can say it out loud now. I don't think the Conservatives are going to be willing participants here. Poilievre has not missed an opportunity to sling mud in the last month or so. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, he's the opposition leader. It is his job to sling mud. The Liberals will probably be doing the exact same thing if they were the opposition. And maybe that's where our politics needs to change in this country. The opposition should not be opposing just to oppose, right? For the most part, it isn't helpful and it does not serve Canadians. And I'm telling you today, Mark Carney could announce a pipeline and the Conservatives will still find a way to oppose it. It is weird, right? But I've got to say, just looking at the tone of Poilievre's post in the last month or so, I think he might be on thin ice with his caucus. And maybe that's the reason why he has stepped up the attacks a bit more. I think he's panicking. I was surprised to see Melissa Lampman, Pierre Poilievre's deputy leader, on CBC the other day. Now, that wasn't something we saw on the campaign trail. Perhaps the reason Poilievre is panicking is because his caucus has voted to adopt the Reform Act rules that will allow them to trigger a leadership review. There's actually talk that Poilievre could face a leadership review as early as March. There's that, but also we know that Poilievre would love nothing more than to get back to the polls. Now, I don't know if that will improve his fortunes, but I'm sure he'd love to get back to the polls today if he could, right? He would love to see the government fall at the earliest opportunity. To that, I would say, careful what you wish for. I don't know that Poilievre's likability has increased since the election. I think it might be worse now if we're being honest, right? At number 4, the carbon tax is not back yet, right? I remember when Mark Carney reduced the carbon tax to 0, a lot of my conservative friends were telling me how it was a hoax and how Mark Carney will bring it back the day after the election. I actually had someone say, Mark Carney will bring back the consumer carbon tax and he will increase it 1,000%. And I was like, whoa, you guys are literally pulling numbers out from between your cheeks. Here's some news for you guys, okay? According to Statistics Canada, gas prices were down 1.6% in March compared to March last year. So year over year, gas prices are down. Anyways, I'll keep this one short. The consumer carbon tax is not back yet. Although if we're being fair, the legislation is still there. At number 5, provinces are moving on fast-tracking projects. Now, this one has been interesting to watch. Mark Carney talked about fast-tracking nation-building projects on the campaign trail. It was also the subject of the First Minister's meeting last week. Now, I'm interested in seeing where this goes. Like, all the First Ministers have tabled what they consider projects of national interest. There are still conflicting interests at that table, obviously, but it does seem that they're willing to work together. But also, just listening to the First Minister's meeting, there seems to be something that could potentially blow up between the BC Premier, David Eby, and Danielle Smith, Alberta Premier, as you know. BC seems to be rejecting the idea of the Northern Gateway pipeline, which obviously Danielle Smith would love very much to get the pipeline. David Eby also said he doesn't want the tanker bans lifted. So right there, those two demands that Danielle Smith has tabled will certainly need some dialogue, right? Now, don't get me started on Quebec, right? But do get me started on Danielle Smith, okay? It would seem that she is taking a tone that is a bit more amenable to dialogue. Less of the threats, more of the dialogue. I like that. However, she has opened a can of worms by lowering the threshold for triggering a referendum on Alberta's secession. But so far, it would seem that Mark Carney is choosing to ignore the secession talk. I don't think I've heard much from Mark Carney specifically about the prospect of Alberta leaving Canada. So I think that's interesting. I would watch that space. I'm interested in seeing what Mark Carney does about Alberta. But in terms of actually building things, it seems some of the provinces are already moving to put legislative backing in place to allow them to actually cut down approval time on these nation building projects. Mark Carney says he wants project approvals to take a maximum of 2 years. He has also talked about one project, one review. He has also talked broadly about shovel-ready zones, which was something that Poilievre coincidentally promised on the campaign trail. Now, it is interesting that BC and Ontario have already put forward legislation to help with fast-tracking projects. Bill 5 is currently in the committee stage in Ontario. BC has also put forward Bill C-15 as well. It's interesting that both bills are facing opposition from First Nations and environmental groups. Both provinces are led by majority government, so they can push these bills through. And I expect Doug Ford to do exactly that in Ontario. David Eby, on his side, has actually surprised me. He has surprised me big because he's NDP, right? The fact that the BC NDP are willing to push Bill C-15 through, despite the opposition from First Nations and environmental groups, suggests that they have the backing of Mark Carney. Now, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Anyways, those are 5 signs Mark Carney may not be a complete disaster. He may not be the disaster that conservatives expect. Here's an extra for you guys, actually. I have an extra point. Carney has invited Narendra Modi to the G7 summit this year, despite strained ties between Canada and India over the last few years. Now, you'll recall that India and the Modi administration were linked to the murder of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil, no less, allegedly. Justin Trudeau pointed the finger at them. India, of course, denies that accusation till today. But nonetheless, Mark Carney has chosen to invite Narendra Modi to the G7 summit, which is holding here in Canada. Now, even liberal MPs like Sukh Dhaliwal of Surrey have questioned the optics of inviting the head of a country that murdered a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. Now, there's also talk that Carney and China have agreed to regularize communication again. The whole U.S. trade war thing overshadows everything. And a lot of people, I think, forget that we're still in a trade war with China. This move by Carney is part of efforts to remove Chinese tariffs on Canadian agricultural and seafood products. Look, I will give Carney some credit here. This is actually a good thing. This is a ballsy move. These moves were bound to be criticized. They were bound to face opposition, especially the India one. But it is a move that suggests that Carney does plan to be pragmatic in leading this country. The US, China, and India are basically three of the biggest economies in the world. It is not in our best interest to be fighting a trade war with all three of them at the same time. And really, if we mean to diversify our trade away from the US, we need to get in with India and China. It's too important. It's too big. It is very important. And that's that pragmatism that Mark Carney seems to be showing at this particular point in time. Now, I'm still interested in seeing what Mark Carney does with Donald Trump. I want to see what kind of concessions he makes and who gets pissed off here with the different concessions that he might make in order to sort of settle out this war with the US. I think that one will be a grenade to handle, right? But you guys let me know. Have you seen any signs that Mark Carney knows what he's doing? Add yours in the chat. And if you haven't watched my video breaking down the 4 signs that Mark Carney could be a disaster for Canada already, I posted that last week. Just click this video on screen right now, watch it, and let me know your thoughts. Okay? And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Peace.